And in talking to most of the athletes we were working with who were either ex-pros, semi-pros, wannabe pros, like, high caliber riders, all of them said that mostly they found they were dialing down, not dialing up to stay in that sweet spot. They found that under normal conditions, they would push harder than that 4% sweet spot. And we were asking them to back off things a little bit more than they were used to. And that was the most shocking thing. And of course, by backing off things, what ended up happening is they got more flow. And once they dropped into flow, then they would do those harder things with much less fuss and much less drama. So they ended up going farther, faster over time, but the daily experience was less, not more.
That was Steven Kotler, and you're listening to the Just Fly Performance Podcast. Before we get to the show today, I wanted to mention a really cool item that is available now from our sponsor, simplyfaster.com, in their store. That item is Exogen Premium Wearable Resistance. Exogen is a series of tight-fitting sleeves along with uniquely shaped fusiform weights that strap directly onto those sleeves. So what I mean is you can have shin sleeves, arm sleeves, shorts, and a vest, and you can strap these uniquely fusiform shaped weights that they're light in nature, 100, 200 grams, that strap on in a way that allows you not only to resist movement very specifically, but also add fine-tuned elements of rotation to that resistance. So this is the next level of wearable resistance. You may have heard this from back long ago on the show, Hank Kreinhoff talking about it, to recently Chris Korfist, sprint coach, talking about it. This is the next level in premium wearable resistance. I've used it myself. I love it. I love not only the way it feels and the way you feel form and technique change. It's like combining technique with power. And so often we just think about weighted vests as just pure force, pure downward gravity loaded resistance. This is the ultimate combination of technique with power, and it shows up in things like Chris Korfist being able to take time off an athlete's 10-meter fly by putting the sleeves just on one side of the body, an ipsilateral resistance. We're using the body's own systems, fine-tuning it, and that's what this does. It allows you as the coach or an athlete to create, explore, and fine-tune the way that the resistance is rotationally impacting the body. This is next level stuff, and I know you'll love it. So you can check that out in the Simply Faster store. Head on over to simplyfaster.com. That's simply with an I, faster.com, and get your Exogen gear today. Hello and welcome to another show. When I was a young athlete, I was incredibly up and down in my sport performance. Basketball particularly. Track was not too bad, but as a basketball player in high school, I was on fire one game and awful the next. And although I remember reading about getting, quote unquote, in the zone in one of my training books I had read back at age 15 or 16, I just remember not caring that much about that portion of it. I cared more about what plyometrics should I do and this, that, and the other thing. But the funny thing is I had the athleticism part down pat, but I frustrated my coach more than anything with my inconsistency. And if I could go back in time and then reflecting on that whole experience as a coach now, I would have definitely emphasized sports psychology and helping myself get into flow states way more often. Flow states and peak performance have become a much more important part of what I do as an athlete, just how I train, and then as a coach, how I've really scaled my workouts, my warm-ups, everything athletes are touching in the gym. And that's just in the physical preparation sector. I actually would be really interested to coach team sports with all this in mind, but just trying to lead athletes into an immersive training experience where they can get into more of the zone and flow states and lose track of time and be fully challenged and fully present. I think these are things that we all work on. In my readings of this topic, one man stands out, and that is Steven Kotler. He is a best-selling author and renowned flow state expert. He's written books such as The Art of Impossible, Stealing Fire, The Rise of Superman, and many others. His work has been nominated for 2 Pulitzer Prizes, translated into 40 languages, and has appeared in over 100 publications. Steven is the executive director of the Flow Research Collective, and not only is Steven prolific in the writing space, but he has skin in the game in extreme sports themselves, being involved in surfing, downhill mountain biking, skiing, and he's also learned and participated with a number of the world's greatest athletes in this arena. For the podcast today, Steven is going to talk about neurobiology and flow states as it relates to goal setting, burnout, skill progression, having a fulfilling career, and much more. Whether you are a coach looking to just get an edge and get some ideas with keeping your athletes optimally challenged and engaged throughout training sessions in the course of a season, or you're looking for your own daily habits and routine and goals for yourself in the professional field. These concepts are global, and there is a ton of gold in this show that helps us in many levels of human performance, athletes obviously included. I'm excited to get you guys this one. This was an awesome talk. Let's get on to it, episode 240. Steven, so one of the things I wanted to ask you in kicking this off is, what is your favorite extreme sport memory? I know you've written a lot about I'm like a ton of them.
Favorite memory? I don't know if I have a favorite memory. God, there are so many. I'll tell you the one that came to mind first. There's a couple of them. So my favorite extreme sport memory, actually, this is a funnier story, is the first time I was in the mountains in Chamonix in France, which is, really hardcore territory, with professional athletes. I was with early extreme skiers, the Deloriers and the Egans. They were two brothers, Rob and Eric Delorier and John and Dan Egan. And they were the early Warren Miller extreme skiing crew. They were part of that crew. And my introduction, it's the first run, it's supposed to be a warm-up lap. That's all we're doing. And the warm-up lap turns out to be over 50 degrees, the steepest thing I've ever skied, really, really, really narrow and terrifying, just absolutely terrifying. And I'm about halfway down and have just sort of come to the conclusion that I might live through the experience, right? But I literally and Eric Delorier comes screaming past me at probably 60 miles an hour. And as he passes by, he goes, "Look out for the black line," and sort of disappear. And I'm like, look out for the black line? Like, what the hell is he talking about, right? And I come around a corner and I see a couple hundred yards below me what looks like a black line. And then I just see Eric get to the black line and launch over it and fly a very long way. And I realized that black line is a crevasse. It's a 25-foot wide, 300-foot deep crevasse that's at the bottom of this damn run, and it's a mandatory air out. And so I have to jump the goddamn thing. And I do, and land, and it's by far the hardest, scariest, craziest thing I'd done up to that point on skis. And I was really just about to puke, right? By the time I got to Eric at the bottom, and I was like, dude, that was a little gnarly, right? And he was like, "Oh yeah, man, that was gnarlier than I thought. Maybe next time I'll have to buckle my boots." And I looked down, and it's not that his ski boots are just unbuckled. It's that they're the tongues are, he's wearing freaking house slippers. He just did that while not even attached to his skis. And it took every single bit of anything I had just to sort of survive. And he it was literally just a warm up for him, in that he wasn't even in his skis. And that was sort of my welcome to the pros kind of, where I was like, oh shit, this is I thought I was an expert skier. And when I got there and I actually realized how big the gap between me and where the pros actually, it was so colossal. That's sort of my favorite memory, because it was how I learned how far I had to go, really in a very rude kind of heavy awakening kind of way. That falls into my favorite memory category. There are a couple others that were up there, but that may win.
I think that's where one of those things where extreme sports, and I guess you call them regular sports, or sports where there's not a risk of death or things like that. To me, that is such a potential difference maker, right? If there's fear of death, that can really make you.
Yeah. To me, I always say, if you can't get seriously injured, it's not really a sport. I don't believe you. I know a lot of people who play tennis would disagree with me, or golf, right? And I'm happy for the argument, but in my mind, sport is something where the most common sports injury in the world occurs in basketball. If you were to list contact sports and what's the most dangerous sport in the world, basketball wins for broken bones above all the other stuff. So you have to sort of expand your definition to meet the data. But yeah, I do sort of think it's a different game when those are the stakes.
Yeah, and I'd like to get into some of the neurochemistry of that. I mean, most people listening to this probably don't train extreme sport athletes, but I feel like if you took that tennis player, right, and you put like a crevasse in the middle, I don't know, there's some sort of fear now in that tennis game, neurochemically. I don't know, I'm kind of curious what would
it's
change.
interesting because I will tell you, so as you know, I have a new book out called The Art of Impossible, and it is a book, it's lessons learned from people who have gone after capital I impossible, that which has never been done. And I tell a story in there about my first time I met Laird Hamilton, who back in the 90s, when he first started towing into Jaws, nobody had ever seen anything like it. It was one of the most extreme, big wave surfing. For surfing is a 1,000-year-old sport, and progress is pretty slow. And up till 1996, the biggest wave anybody had ever surfed is 25 feet. And above that, there were physics papers written about how you can't get into a wave that's over that. And today, 2 decades later, thanks to Laird and a bunch of other pioneers, surfers are routinely towing into waves that are 100, 110 feet tall and paddling into 60, 70-foot waves. And Laird was one of the first to do it. And it was such a impossible. And I remember meeting Laird the first time. He was just 31 and I was about 27. And he said something that I think is really relevant here. He said, Stephen, people see me on a 50-foot wave and they think, oh, no way, man. That's impossible. I'll never do that. And he's like, well, okay, maybe, but you're seeing me at like 31 on that 50-foot wave. What you didn't see me is me at 3 on a 3-foot wave, and 4 on a 4-foot wave, and 5 on a 5-foot wave. And you didn't see me last week on a 49.5-foot wave. So you look at the 50-foot wave and you think, oh my God, that's impossible. And I think from the inside, yeah, Laird, you're not even pushing that hard. What are you doing? And I think that the view is very different on the inside and the outside, but it doesn't actually, the interesting thing about peak performance is, it doesn't matter if you're going after capital I impossible, or you're trying to improve your tennis game, or you're trying to be a little bit better at work. The biology is the same. The tool set is the same. How you get there is the same. How big you want to play and what you want the stakes to be, that's entirely up to you. But the other point is, the thing with mortal consequences is mortal consequences are very relative. Every great athlete I know in the extreme sports world, if they're feeling too much fear, if they don't feel like they have it, if they don't feel like it's literally just, oh, I'm not pushing very hard, I'm pushing but not very hard, they'll back off. That's a sign you go home, because everybody learns the hard way in action adventure sports. That's how you go to the hospital, right? When you just try to go through on courage alone, you go to the hospital. So if you have a long career in action sports, that sort of is gone by your middle 20s. And like literally, injury just weeds out people who think that's the way forward, right? Like they end up breaking too many bones and they don't have long careers.
Yeah, with the risk of death too, like you mentioned, I mean, I'd imagine that like attention and salience network in the brain is probably it's extremely on point, or different than a different sport. Or that's the point I was actually trying to make. Is you would think so, but those athletes, and it depends on the level of the challenge. You know what I mean? Laird is used to surfing waves that are, say, 50 to 70 feet tall. And suddenly if a wave shows up that's 120 feet tall, yeah, gonna catch his attention. But my point is, on the inside, nobody is pushing that much harder. Nobody thinks of it as mortal consequence. I mean, yes, everybody knows if you fall, you could die. But on the inside, it doesn't feel like that. It feels like progression in any other sport. It really does. Because when it stops feeling like progression, right, when it starts to feel like, oh, wow, this is crazy and these risks are so high, and that's when people go home. That's when people are like, okay, not today. I'm not really wired for this. Sometimes it happens. People get on top of a line in Alaska or something like that and realize they can't get down, and it's way bigger than they expected. That happens. But those are the exceptions much more than the rule. I know in The Art of Impossible, you wrote a lot about goal setting. And so I'm curious how, for, I guess you could call it more normal either daily activities or just sports that there's a little bit less going on.
Yeah. So it's still because, okay, so let's start at the really simple concept, which is, in my opinion, though I think the data backs me up, peak performance is nothing more or less than getting our biology to work for us rather than against us. That's all that's going on. It is going on no matter, that biology doesn't change. And so like the same goal setting biology that's going to help Laird do what he does is going to help any athlete anywhere along the way, because this is how we're biologically wired. So what the biology shows is that we are goal-directed machinery, as you probably know, right? And to really put an emphasis on this, essentially, we don't live in reality. We live in a reality that is shaped by two things, our fears and our goals. Those are the two largest filters on perception and on the world we live in. And they're sort of binary. And when I say they're sort of binary, what I mean is, as you probably know, anxiety and curiosity / excitement are the same neurochemically, the same cocktail. You're talking about a little bit of cortisol and a bunch of norepinephrine and possibly some dopamine depending. Most mammals can't feel anxiety and curiosity, or anxiety and excitement at the same time. It's a binary, it flips back and forth. In fact, when they do animal welfare stuff for like cows, they have to lead cows into a barn because everybody needs to be inoculated, right? And cows don't like being penned in and put into a line, and that's what has to happen. And it stresses out the cows, which is bad for the cows. So they don't want to do that. So what do? They put things up that make the cows curious. Because by being curious, they can't be anxious, because it's literally, humans can sort of do both at once, but it's not, your goals will overwhelm your fears. They'll win most of the time. Anyways, back to goal setting. What the research shows, what the biology always shows, is that there may be more than this, but for sure you need 3 levels of goals in your life. You need mission tier level goals, what Peter Diamandis and myself have termed a massively transformative purpose in our book Bold. Mission level goals, I'm a writer. A mission level goal would be, I want to write books that have a deep impact on the world, right? It's a process goal. There's no clear, like, how do I know I've won, right? Like it's an infinite game. It's not a finite game. I'm not saying I want to win the Nobel Prize in literature. Too many things outside my control for me to steer my whole life based on that, right? It could be, I could want that, but it's hard to steer about it. So mission level goals, then we need what are known as high hard goals. And if mission level goals are the overarching mission statement, a high hard goal is like a 1 to 5 year step that would lead me to accomplish that high hard goal, right? So let's put it in athletic terms. The mission level goal could be, I want to be a great runner. High hard goal is, I want to run the New York Marathon. I want to run the Boston Marathon. I want to start running triathlons. I want to run an Ironman, right? Those are high hard goals, 1 to 5 years. Then you need clear goals, your daily to-do list. This is your daily action plan. Clear goals are a term that comes out of flow science. They're one of the preconditions that lead to flow. They're a flow trigger technically. And how they work, we can get into that and all that stuff. But the point is that clear goals are daily to-do list. They should be set in there's a specific order you want to set them to maximize flow and maximize some other stuff. That's a long story, and it'll take us 20 minutes to talk about it. So it's in the new book, Art Impossible. You can check it out if you want. But those 3 tiers are usually important, and they need to be pointed all in the same direction. So everything needs to align to get the most out of it. But, the benefits are significant. So, for example, properly set high hard goals. Gary Latham and John Locke, sort of the godfathers of motivation theory and motivation science, did tremendous amounts of research to discover that properly set high hard goals will increase motivation by 11 to 25%. That's a crazy number. It means if you're working 8-hour days, right, you're going to get 2 free hours worth of work simply for having the right frame around it. And it's interesting because I have found, just as a skier, that properly set high hard goals will usually get a couple more runs a day out of my body. And I like to leave everything on the hill. I like to go as hard as possible and leave it all out there. But I find that properly set high hard goal will, give me 2 extra runs, which is a lot of, like, at top levels when you're moving at 60 miles an hour. That's a lot of skiing. That's a lot of energy just for having a properly set goal. If I go into a day and 16 laps are my goal, and, I'll usually run out of energy, 14, and I can get to 16, or I get to 18 or 25 or whatever goal I set that day. It tends to help that way too. Anyways, science of goal setting, a little bit. I will say one other thing, because there's a bunch of athletes listening and coaches. And so there's clear goals seem to function as a flow trigger. So one, when you set them in advance, right, this is my to-do list that I'm going to do today. That's one kind of clear goal. There's a second kind that shows up very commonly in athletics, where you're at the gym and you've done your 3 sets of 10 and you're like, you know what, I can get 2 other reps out of this. So you set a clear goal. Instead of the last set being of 10, it's going to be of 12, and you push towards it. And when you do that, you not only get a little extra motivation, it also seems to drive focus and flow, and it trains grit. So that's a different kind of goal setting that athletes can use a lot. And we all, as athletes, we know that you set like these mini little goals along the way, because it helps you perform better along the way.
One of the things you said I'd actually like to dig into, and I know you said that goal setting conversation, it really could be a whole show, and I have a few other questions down on the chart that I'd like to get to, certainly. But one of the things you just mentioned, that you have the massively transformative purpose, and then the high hard goals, and then the clear goals. And I think that I've done other podcasts with coaches, and a lot of times the talk is more just about on the day, like here's the clear goals on the day, here's the process goals, but we don't talk as much about those umbrellas that go beyond, like the high.
Yeah, let me give you I wish I could give you this from athletics, but Salim Ismail, who's the original executive director of Singularity University, where they basically train companies, organizations to tackle sort of grand global challenges. Doesn't matter. He was doing a study of the 100 fastest growing companies in the world. He wanted to find the 100 fastest growing, most agile unicorns in the world, and he found that, and what are their commonalities? And the most startling thing he found is that they all had massively transformative purposes. There was a guiding principle. This is Simon Sinek's Start With Why. Also, all these ideas have been flying around for a while, because the neurobiology of goal setting, it's getting better and better and better. We're starting to understand, this is exactly what the mechanisms are. This is how they're working and why they're working. And I often think, mission level goals, and this is also tricky in coaching. I mean, everybody sort of knows the mission level goal, win a championship. But that's also like, coaches play for a different mission level goal, right? Their mission level goal is have a long career, right? Win multiple champions. Those are different kind of mission level goals. And everybody knows players' goals could be, their mission level goals are get to the pros, you get through college, get noticed, get to the pro. So there's misalignment between bigger vision level goals. Thus, it's helpful to find one that you can agree on and all move towards.
Yeah, I would agree with that, because I was going to ask, like when you had said that those high hard goals can give you such a performance boost, my thought is, okay, well, I know it's all context dependent, but do we hit high hard goals first? Do we look at because I think most people just jump right to clear goals, but
yeah, I don't think with high hard goals, I always keep moving towards them, but I think you want to set it and forget it, in a sense. Like I use my mission level goals as a filter for my life. So, for example, there's basically three things I do in the world, 3 big things I do in the world, and there's like 3 things I got to do to support that stuff, right? So I have 6 filters sort of at the top of my life, and it's easier actually if I give examples. So at a mission level, I write great books, right? Advanced flow science and research, and I'm trying to make the world a better place for animals. And to do all that stuff, there's a friends and family category, right? I got to have good relationships with my friends and my family. I have to hurl myself down mountains and get into flow on a regular basis, because it helps everything else. And then there's a bunch of sports stuff that I got to do to keep all that stuff running, right? If an opportunity comes my way and it fits in with those 6, I say yes. If it doesn't, it's an immediate no. So it's a first filter. And it allows me, and every athlete I know who's serious is short on time, right? One of the hardest things about like being a serious athlete is the massive amounts of time involved in it. And by the way, the fact that you're going to have to sleep 7 to 8 hours a night, and you're going to sleep more than other people because you're using more physical energy, right? And those requirements you can't really get around. So you need really strong filters for your life. And mission level goals not only tell you where you're going, but tell you what you're saying no to. And that's really important.
Yeah, I think that is. I for anyone who's worked with athletes enough, it's like you can have all the clear goals in the world, but if you know the athlete is kind of lost when it comes to the more global goals, you just never end up really truly getting that far. And I like what you said about bringing everyone together to agree on something, because people could be in different directions. And I think that, yeah, it definitely makes a lot of sense. And the more I've gone through the process, the more I've learned more about the managerial side of working with a team. And I couldn't agree more. Steven, you had said a little bit about like as athletes go through their careers, and that was actually one of the first questions I had written on my list. Is I know in your book you had talked about motivation and drive, and a question I had is how might athletes lose their passion and drive, or what are some reasons athletes will drop off throughout the career? What are some factors that are present in those occurrences?
So it's interesting. One, I will say there's a chunk of this question that is outside what the work I actually do, right? So I don't know if I'm the end all be all expert on this answer, and I like to try to stay in my lane. That said, what I do know is that the conditions for burnout in business or in the creative arts or in athletics tend to be roughly the same, right? And some of them are sort of baked into athletics, because the number one driver of burnout is, two steps forward, one step forward, two steps back, one step forward, two steps back. So if you have a passive aggressive coach who keeps moving the bar on you, right? You don't know how the biggest driver for humans is meaningful progress toward meaningful goals, right? Like that we love. We love the path to mastery. We love that. So with athletics, you can be losing, but still moving forward. But if you've got the wrong guy steering the ship or woman steering the ship, and they're not, if that attitude is wrong, that can cause it. But that's the number one driver of burnout. I will say, this is what we have discovered in just studying burnout in general, which is that if you are sleeping 7-8 hours a night, if you have an active recovery protocol in place, if you are getting regular access to flow, and you are not in one of those sort of passive aggressive situations where somebody keeps moving the bar, you're actually making meaningful progress forward someplace you want to go, it is almost impossible to burn out. But you start removing those conditions, and you're going to have problems. I would say that the main reason people drop out along the way, if it's not injury, is so flow states have triggers. And okay, so let's back up. We get hooked on sports because they produce flow. As a general rule, and we tend to excel in the sports that produce the most flow as practitioners, right? And we know, for example, that flow in athletics, so it's a great study that was done on incoming high school freshmen. And they asked, what are the major components of their secondary activity? So not school's their primary activity, their secondary activity could be they played football, could be they played volleyball, could be they played the tuba and the marching band, whatever it is, that's their secondary activity. So they wanted to know, what is the greatest distinguisher of the students who come in with a secondary activity that they love, who are still going to be committed to it 4 years later when they leave, right? They're still on the football team, the track team, or in the band. And it's the amount of flow it produces freshman year. That's the number one, right? That's basically all of it. And it's because 5 neurochemicals that underpin flow, among their many performance enhancing functions, they're all reward chemicals. They're great pleasure drugs, and flow is the only time you get all 5 at once, which is why flow is our favorite experience on the planet. And so one of the secrets to keeping athletes in their sports is to make sure their sports continue to produce flow for them. Now, that's where things get really complicated because of what's known as the challenge skills balance, which is flow's most important trigger. Everybody listening, I'm sure, is familiar with this. Flow follows focus. It shows up when all our attention is in the right here, right now. That's what the triggers do. They drive attention into the present moment. If I were to say this neurobiologically, I would say they do one of three things. They drive dopamine into our system, they drive norepinephrine into our system, or they lower cognitive load, or some combination of those factors. Dopamine and norepinephrine are our predominant focusing chemicals, right? This is pleasure and excitement. And, when it's in our system, we just pay attention automatically to what task at hand. And cognitive load, it's all the crap you're thinking about at any one time. And what happens is if I lower cognitive load, it liberates energy, which the brain will then repurpose to pay attention to the task at hand. So all three of these experiences drive flow. Now, the challenge skills balance is the idea that we pay the most attention to the task at hand when the challenge of the task slightly exceeds our skill set. We want to stretch but not snap. And slightly exceeds our skill set means you're outside your comfort zone, but only a little bit, right? Get too far outside your comfort zone, too much anxiety, you actually end up with too much norepinephrine, and it blocks peak performance. It ends up blocking flow for a variety of neurobiological reasons. The point is that as you progress in sports, when you go from, JV to varsity or into college or into the pro, right? At each level, the challenge skills balance is jumping up, right? Shit just got harder. It just got harder. And where you are versus, especially if you're playing a team sport, right? Basketball, where you are as a high school player, suddenly jumping to college, that whole challenge skill equation, sometimes it doesn't, but sometimes it can radically tilt for somebody. And that's one. So one of the things with a long athletic career is I am less interested in a sense in professional athletes inside, clearly defined brackets. I mean, there are a lot of people on my staff who work directly with those athletes and do that work. I'm more interested in questions of lifetime peak performance and like how do you stay in flow as an athlete over your entire life, much more than how am I going to compete for the 5 years between 20 and 25. And I'm like, okay, well, that's great. And there's a lot of people who do that work, and we do some of it as well. But I spend a great deal of time with athletes on the back end of there's a long back end to that career, no matter how great you were. And how do you thrive in those environments? How do you not burn out? How do you stay committed as an athlete? Those are questions that are really interesting to me personally. So I spend a little bit more time there.
I started my career in strength and conditioning, having a very manufactured approach to training. You're going to do this many sets and reps of this exercise. You're going to do it like this. You're going to do this movement prep first and everything with that. And over 8 years of time as a full-time strength coach, I slowly shifted into a more athlete-centered organic approach where athletes had more options on how to do things. They could express themselves. They could move with flow. We did more gymnastics. We did more games. We did more organic learning. I will never turn back on that. Along the same lines, I've gotten into a more organic approach of supplementation, moving away from caffeine-heavy pre-workouts into herbs such as shilajit, which you may have heard mentioned by guests on this show in the past as being awesome for strength and vitality. That's why I'm proud to partner with two-time previous guest on this show, Logan Christopher, and his company, Lost Empire Herbs. If you want to check out some of the herbs that have led me into becoming a stronger and more vital human being, ones that I use personally, you can head to lostempireherbs.com/justfly. You can get 15% off your order there, as well as get a 365-day money-back guarantee. Again, to get 15% off your order with Lost Empire Herbs and see my top recommended herbs that I use personally, head to lostempireherbs.com/justfly. All right, let's get on back to the show. You mentioned longevity, and I've been thinking that a lot about that myself. I mean, I'm 37. I don't play team sports or extreme sports for that matter nearly as often as I would like. A lot of it's just training, and a lot of it's just trying to almost reinvent training over the years. Just to even for me to the point where it's like, hey, here's a set of monkey bars. Instead of doing pull-ups, it's how can you navigate this and throw pull-ups in, and just trying to make it new and exciting, and even in that space. And so at the end of the day, I find myself often saying, I'd rather just find a new way to play a game today. And then we'll throw the training in there. It's just trying to feed that engine that wants to learn and explore and come up with something new versus, in terms of just training, a push-up's a push-up, a pull-up's a pull-up. You can spice it up, but I don't feel like there's nearly as many things you can do with that versus I'm sure what you do every time you go skiing.
So it's interesting, but like skiing is a great example. I ski when I go out skiing. My ski partners are either pros or ex-pros, and I got to keep up. And I'm 53, and I run a company, and I write books, and I do blah blah blah. And so, the Flow Research Collective, which is the organization I run, where we study the neurobiology of peak human performance, we look for what I call multi-tool solutions. I want a solution. That solves multiple problems at once. I always tell people that peak performers are too busy to solve problems one at a time. And if your solution only solves one particular problem, it's a bad solution. Find a better solution. You need multi-tool solutions because you're too busy. So I'll give you an example. I've got dogs. I have to hike my dogs every day. So I started realizing, and of course I use the dog hike as ski training, but I started to realize I was like, well, I'm hiking now like 90 minutes and I need to go farther. And I started introducing weight vests because this is a thing that I automatically had to do. And I have to do it anyways. And a long hike in nature resets the nervous system. It's a multi-tool solution, does a bunch of stuff. And adding a weight vest in allows me to train legs and core. And it's interesting because I really doubled down on this during COVID because COVID cut ski season short. And I was really frustrated by that for a lot of reasons. And I decided that the only way I could live with myself is if I entered this ski season this year as a better skier than I ended last season. So I had to actually improve as a skier in the off season after they closed the resorts. And how to do that. One of the ways I did this was through weight vests, and I got it up to 90-minute hikes up and down mountains with 30 to 40-pound weight vests on, and I entered the season stronger than I've ever been. And I'm 53, and it's a solution that packed inside of other things that I was already doing. So I think one of the problems is as we get older is sometimes the novel stuff is great, but we're busy. So I look for things that I'm already doing, and how do I take those things and crank them up more. And one of the reasons I look at this is the second half of the thing I wanted to say to you. Not writing this book right now, but I am researching a book on peak human performance over 50, because there's tremendous amounts of data that says that if you take care of the body, you can actually perform incredibly well into your 80s right now. And we're starting to understand these are the exact levers. And this is not even in getting into like the longevity research and the biohacking stuff and forget everything else. I'm just talking about like, what do we know about the human body and how long can it sustain levels so that we might call peak performance. And it's a lot longer than anybody actually suspected. And we're also like bionics is showing up now, right? Like there are strap-on exoskeleton knees that skiers can now use that will allow them to ski at really high levels long, into their elderly years for other sports. This stuff is coming at an exponential pace. So we get to be athletes for a lot longer than any other generation. And the data is pretty consistent that we are capable of that kind of performance. And I think we need to sort of change our thinking about, what does it mean? I mean, Tom Brady's being great at this, right? Like, he's a great example, but it's just, he shouldn't be the exception. He should be the rule.
Yeah. A podcast that literally just went out on this show. One of the pieces in the show notes was a bunch of elderly Chinese individuals, like in their 70s, at a park doing like giant swings on monkey bars and doing all this gymnastic work that you would expect maybe people 30 years younger to be doing. And they were still doing it. I was completely blown away. That was shared with me by Nikolai Morris. And one of the things you said that actually, this is just kind of a general thought, maybe more than a question, but I feel like it's like if we're becoming more complex as human beings, you think about, we talk about, in 40 years, is it going to be like cyber sports with people like half human and genetically, but I think about it in the sense that the more, if you had like bionic legs to work with, it would almost, there's another option for your brain to grow connections and almost have to work faster in a sense. Maybe it's a random thought, but I think about how fast we're expanding our skill set in the world of extreme sports and things like that. And I don't know, maybe that's an interesting.
I did write an article for Slate a while ago on the future of sport that looked at, it was right after the first space dive, and that Red Bull had done with Felix Baumgarten, and that that is now progressing as a sport. Like space diving is a new thing, and I talked about where does this what's 10 years on, what's 20 years on, et cetera, et cetera. They're interesting, cool questions. Flow, as a general rule, is the secret weapon when it comes to keeping up with the technology, at least for a while, because in flow, it's mostly neurochemical that's doing this part of the equation. There's other things going on, but the neurochemicals involved surround the brain's information processing machinery. So when we're in flow, we take in more information per second. We find faster connections between it and other information. And by the way, fast muscle response goes up and things like that as well. So it seems to be our secret weapon for keeping pace with the technology up to some limit, right? But I don't think we've hit that limit yet.
Yeah, I'm sure there is some bar that's like, okay, like,
I mean, there's physical limits on how fast, right, the brain can actually process information, and there's probably different limits on the technology, would be my guess.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see where that does end up going. I want to go back to something actually you said, because I think you were talking or unpacking it a little bit, but you said meaningful progress versus the coach who's almost forcing the stick forward too fast. And you had mentioned like an athlete, you're going to jump from JV to varsity and the challenge goes up. I'm curious what the definitions and little subpoints of meaningful progress are.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So that's mostly about mastery as a motivator, right? And mastery, there are 5 major intrinsic motivators: curiosity, passion, purpose, autonomy, and mastery. They're designed to be cultivated in an order. When I say designed, I mean evolution designed human bodies to work a certain way, and evolution designed the intrinsic motivation system to be you can cultivate them in any order whatsoever, but there's an order that works best. Curiosity is designed to be built into passion. Once you have passion, if you can attach that to something outside of yourself, there's often that massively transformative purpose, right? We talked about earlier. You get purpose. Once you have purpose, the system wants autonomy, freedom to pursue that purpose. And then once you have the freedom to pursue your purpose, the system wants mastery, which are the skills to pursue that purpose well. And when you say meaningful progress towards meaningful goals, that literally neurobiologically means progress where you're getting regular access to dopamine and regular access to flow. Progress is measured in the brain in dopamine, right? Little reward hits. This is why when you have a clear goals list, cross every time you do something, you have to cross it off your list. Otherwise, it's not doing its job. You're not getting the dopamine of, I accomplished that. You literally get more dopamine when you cross it off the list and it's done, than just set it and forget it kind of thing. A. And B, flow. This is work I really looked at in a book I wrote called West of Jesus prior to Rise of Superman. But I spent a long time looking at the question of why do people believe things? What is meaning? And there are a lot of different answers to the question, but one of the big answers is when an experience produces flow, we tend to say that is a meaningful experience, right? So flow is partially these parts of why we believe things, what meaningful means. And when you look for people who score sort of off the charts for overall well-being, life satisfaction, meaning, and purpose, they're always the people with the most flow in their lives. And these are well-established facts in positive psychology, really well-established facts. So you're technically, and to take it one level deeper, right? You're technically talking about dopamine plus some other reward chemicals and possibly some other activity in the brain that is actual meaningful progress towards meaningful goals. But it just basically means we like the little wins. The human brain loves stacking little win on top of little win on top of little win. That feels like that's momentum, right? That's what we term momentum. And it's one of our absolute favorite feelings.
Yeah, one of the training systems that's, I think it's really popular in high school, but it's like bigger, faster, stronger is the name. And one of the things that they had going for them was they had any given day you could have different ways to set like a PR. Maybe you set a 3-rep max PR, a 10-rep max PR. It's like they always had a way to somehow you're walking out of there with some sort of personal best. And I've heard of elite powerlifting coaches. Louis Simmons, who's not too far from here over in Columbus, has said, like, I've heard this, not himself, but like make every day like a good day somehow. Like it's.
Yeah, I think that, well, so the reason the challenge skills balance is so damn tricky in sport is, first of all, what the hell do you mean by challenge and skills, right? And when psychologists have spent a really long time, like 30 years, trying to answer this question, and there's like 8 things that actually make it up. And here's something that's shocking, and this is especially among elite athletes, not even like world class, but just elite athletes and above. When you say challenge and skills, because as we know, the farther up you get, talent becomes more and more equal, right? And so advantages are much thinner. At the elite level, confidence is 81% of what we mean by challenge and skills. At elite level, when you're dealing with elite level athletic talent. So confidence is a huge factor there, but so is cultural background, ability to delay gratification, optimism. There's a bunch of other factors that go into it, but same with energy level. So what is slightly outside your skill set today, right, totally depends on how much sleep you got last night, what kind of meals you recently had, how well are you processing nutrition, right? How's your hydration? There's a bunch of physical stuff, about the current moment that go into it. So we know, for example, this is an interesting thing. A bunch of years ago, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, the godfather of flow psychology, and a Google mathematician sat down. They tried to put a number on what's the actual balance between challenge and skills. Can we put a number on it? And they did a back of the envelope calculation that was not ever meant to be taken seriously. And they came up with 4%. That we maximize the amount of flow when the challenge is 4% greater than our skill set. And we took that number and ran all kinds of experiments with it, the vast majority of them with athletes, because it's easier to qualify 4% in athletics than almost any place else. And some of it was ridiculous. You can't, like, if you're strength training, you can't make today's workout 4% harder than yesterday's workout, because by the end of the week, you're right. Like, if that was the case, fantastic. We would all get really, really, really strong really fast. So the gradient scale had to change for certain things. But one of the things that we discovered, and this was in studying mountain bikers, we were looking at, because you can measure every jump on a DH mountain bike hill, and you can go to people and say, what jumps are you comfortable jumping and which ones don't you jump and what, right? Like, we could actually put numbers on it. And I don't think this was we never published this because I still don't think it's a real experiment. I don't think the data is strict enough to be anything more than, like, it's better than an anecdote, less than a real study. But what we learned is this. So normally in athletics, this isn't always the case, but this is very common. You come into a season, whatever your sport, and you get a bunch of flow early on. Happens in most people. And usually what happens is you'll drop into flow and you'll get you'll see a version of yourself that, like, it'll take you a couple months to be able to do all the stuff you just did in flow as an athlete without the flow, right? And then you have more flow states and you get a new threshold and you level up again. And that's kind of standard athletic progression as you automate skills and bring them together, and how they come together in a new flow state. And this is not to say you won't have micro flow states along the way, but the deep, powerful flow states, you tend to happen start of the season and then towards the end of the season, right? That's most people's experience. If we kept athletes in that 4% sweet spot every day, they got better access to flow over time. Their micro flow states started to move a little closer towards macro flow states. So they got into deeper states of flow, and they didn't plateau. They kept getting into flow, and there was continual progress throughout the season, rather than, it start and stop based on plateaus. And we thought that was really neat. And in talking to most of the athletes we were working with, who were, either ex-pros, semi-pros, wannabe pros, like, high caliber riders. All of them said that mostly they found they were dialing down, not dialing up to stay in that sweet spot. They found that under normal conditions, they would push harder than that 4% sweet spot. And we were asking them to back off things a little bit more than they were used to. And that was the most shocking thing. And of course, by backing off things, what ended up happening is they got more flow. And once they dropped into flow, then they would do those harder things with much less fuss and much less drama. So they ended up going farther, faster over time, but the daily experience was less, not more. So when we started this conversation, you said having a crevasse in the middle of the tennis court is going to make a big difference. The reason I was like, no, is this. Because actually, you would never have a giant crevasse in the middle of the tennis court out of nowhere. You'd have the 1 foot crevasse and then the 2 foot crevasse and then the 3. And right by the time you had the giant crevasse in the middle of the tennis court, it was going to be just the thing that was next. Right. And that's my point. It doesn't look like a giant life threatening crevasse, even if it is, because the best athletes are staying in that sweet spot. And to put a final point on this one of the craziest action sport feats ever conducted in history, I read about in Rise, is when Alex Honnold free soloed Half Dome, right? We all saw free solo, the movie where he did El Cap. That was amazing and maybe a bigger feat. But the thing about Half Dome is he free soloed it in 2012, right? No ropes. If he falls, he's going to die. Most climbers take about a day and a half to climb Half Dome. That's right. And they bring portal edges. They sleep on the side of the wall. They come in pairs and teams. Alex free soloed Half Dome in an hour and 22 minutes in 2012. It's the rough equivalent of running like a 4-minute mile in 37 seconds. It's so freaking crazy as an athletic feat. People often point to it and say, yeah, this is in the running for the single greatest feat in action sports history. And certainly up there. And if you ask Alex about it, how did you do this, Alex? And he'll tell you, or at least he did at the time, it was 4% plus 4% plus 4% plus 4% plus 4% day after day, week after week, year after year. Because we get the farthest if we get regular access to flow as athletes, and that's how we maximize flow. And for most elite athletes, it means a little less, not a little more, right? But it also means a little less with way more consistency, right? So you're always sort of pushing that much, so you never have down days. You're never not pushing that much. Or this is why this popped into my mind. You started with always find a way to win the day. Always, wherever you're starting from, you got to figure out what is 4% for me from where I'm starting from, right? It's not, and it changes on a day-to-day basis, and it changes on energy levels. And do you have proper, robust social support networks, right? We all know we get in a fight with our spouse, our wife, our partner, our coach, our friend. We bring less energy to the situation, to what comes next. Focused is harder. We have less in the tank. Social support is really important for physical energy levels, really important for athletes. I don't think talk about importance of social support enough with athletes, but let me drive this point home, because this is really important for every athlete. Whenever the brain makes assesses a challenge, right? It makes a microsecond risk assessment. It says, how big is this problem? How small is this problem? Is this a challenge or is it a threat? And how much energy should I put into the system, and how much anxiety should I put into the system? And part of the brain that calculates that answer is a part of your brain that basically calculates for how robust are your social support networks? How much do your teammates have your back? How much do people love you? How much, if you fall on your face, is somebody going to pick you up, right? So when your brain is assessing how big is this problem in front of me, is it a challenge or is it a threat, just going to determine everything about that challenge skill sweet spot. And are you going to get into flow, or are you going to get overwhelmed or not? Do I have robust social support networks around me. I don't mean you have to know millions of people, but you have to have some real relationships in your life. And you, like, this research shows, we try to train people at the Flow Research Collective to have at least 2 hours of really high quality social support a week. I try to have one high quality conversation with my wife and one high quality conversation with a friend every day. Now, those conversations may be 5 minutes long if I'm hella busy, right? But there's active listening, there's empathy, there's, all this stuff. And I do it because there's a energy cost to not doing it. So you think, I'm too freaking busy to reach out and talk to my best friend. I'm too busy to go talk to my boyfriend, or blah, 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 that kind of stuff. Or as coaches often are like, see players hanging out and bullshit, or hanging out with friends doing non-sports things, and they come down on it, right? Why aren't you in class? Why aren't you practicing? And the correct answer from the player is, I am fucking practicing, right? Like, this is important to how I'm going to play, because having stronger social ties means I'm safer. I feel safer come game time, and it matters.
I love that. And it takes me back to my own experience as a track athlete, and even as a young coach, where I'll just say young coach, where I thought that everything was just the sets and the reps and the workout scheme and the structure of the work. And the longer I've gone through this and had the opportunity to mentor under very elite level coaches, you just see how good they are at structuring the social structure of the team. Like, that is always a priority with those coaches. And I think back to my best years as a track and field competitor, and it was when, yes, the training was good, for sure, but I also had awesome teammates. And I remember one day that year, we were doing our warm-up drills for track, just chucking a tennis ball at each other, like wondering if the coach is going to care. Like, does he care? We're, fucking around. But that was like really, I look back and that was important, like that kind of thing. And I definitely, it's something that I think can't be understated with the total result. And like, I just want to take it back to what you said, because I think this is so important, is you mentioned the 4% every day. And I'm glad you mentioned this with, like, okay, can I really do 4% more push-ups every day? No, like, at some point I can't do 1,000 push-ups. But.
The way it worked with strength stuff is they basically would set like a 4% goal over a period of time, right? So, because when you're dealing with strength or with there's individual daily variations that are based on so many damn factors, you can't do it. So what you want to set is like process goals or things, right? So you can't say, I'm going to lift 4% more weight, or maybe even I'm going to do 4% more reps. But like, oftentimes I'll think about it as, a normal trip to the gym for me is, 12 to 14 exercises, 3 sets of 10 is a standard. Steven goes to the gym and tosses around iron kind of thing. And depending on like, where do I pick that number? Is it going to be 12 sets of 3 or, 13 or up to 15, 16 is based on what's my energy level coming in and where's that 4% going to be. So I can do that, right? I can go harder. I can go longer. I just can't demand 4% strength, things that I can't control is the other thing.
Yeah, I've in kind of a similar vein. As a coach, I like how you said where you start from, like on the day, because it fluctuates on the day. Progress is kind of like the stock market; it kind of goes up and down in that trend.
Well, the other thing is, and this is just a fucking nightmare, but it's so true. I just had this experience a couple weeks ago, and I was reminded of it again. When you have a really high flow day, and I had a breakthrough day skiing where, if you learn a new trick or two over the course of a season as a skier, that's a big season, right? You added like 2 new tricks to or 3 new tricks. I added 7 in a day. I've never had a day like that. I was like, I've never learned, and it was a deep flow, crazy day. And I was with a friend of mine. We were just on fire, and both of us did it. And it took so much energy to do that we didn't get much flow for it was like 2 weeks afterwards. There was so little flow, and it felt like I was going backwards, right? Like I'd made so much progress, and that's also like, that's gonna, I had to re-level set after that, and that happens too, of course.
Yeah,
One
it's
of the reasons it's so damn hard to be a champion, right? Because high flow states after high flow states after high flow states, you know, Kobe didn't get to have, 50, that's why those streaks of 50 plus game nights in a row for Kobe and for, what's his name? Losing his name, who just got traded out of Houston.
oh, Harden.
Harden. Thank you. He had that streak last year. And I was like, what's crazy about the streak is not that is that it either they don't need flow to do it, which is a crazy level of skill, right? Or they can generate deeper flow states more in a row for some reason that I can't quite yet figure out, which is really interesting. Either way, it's a puzzle.
Yeah, you're saying stuff that's like basically it's like, oh, this would be a whole another podcast that would be awesome to talk about with that and how they manage that. Because I know with your anecdote of you doing all these tricks and you had a great flow day and you were feeling on. I would almost look at that as like the super open chain end of things. Even on a real simple chain, even someone do at the Olympics. I worked with swimming. And a lot of these swimmers in the Olympics, they'll swim their best time at the Olympic Games, and then they might not touch that time again for 4 more years. It's
right.
like, and that's a lot, I guess, a simpler skill than crazy tricks, but even simpler yet, an Olympic weightlifter, just a weightlifting, they might not recover and not be able to reproduce that for. And so I like how even just taking that to day and just looking at more consistency, not overgoing each day. It's cool to know that is not only true in just simple day-to-day training with just barbells but also extreme sports and like even these complex skills.
It doesn't. That's what I mean by the biology. It's the same. I always say this to people, nobody wants to believe me. But if you want better peak performance at work, you want to be slightly more productive at work and maybe a little more focused at work and a little happy in your life, or if you want to go after I want to run my first marathon, a high, hard goal, or you want to be the best marathoner in the history of the world, it's the same toolkit. The biology doesn't change. Everybody's working with the same tools. There's no special magic sauce at the top. There's better utilization of the tools over time, but now, of course, every now and again, you get a LeBron James, you get a physical specimen where you're like, okay, that's a genetic thing. Like, that's a guy whose body does stuff that not everybody else is. You know what I mean? Like, the dude's a defensive tackle playing basketball. That's a different thing.
Yeah, with the dial, I wanted to ask you too this about the dial of flow. Like you had mentioned, like we don't want to use up too much, and obviously we want to get there. And I know this will be the last question here because I know our time's run out. But like you've spoken on like the dial of flow, and so what are just some thoughts on managing that in the course of a session? Like, can it get too like can we produce too much?
Yeah. It's a great question, and I think the answer is this. Nobody has looked directly at this at any giant way where I can say, yeah, definitively, this is what the data shows. So the study, to the best of my knowledge, has not been done. But what more and more seems to seem like is if you have a high flow experience, the issue is less about the flow of the game, or of the swim meet or of the ski session, and do you continue to ride or chase that dopamine high afterwards? So I have found, for example, and I do this whether it's a flow state that I get into while writing or a flow state I get into public speaking or as an athlete, there's a period of time that I'm doing the thing and I want flow for that, but afterwards I will go out of my way to pull myself out of flow. When you're on the back end of it, because you still have dopamine and norepinephrine in your system, thoughts are spiraling. One leading idea is leading to the next, is leading to the next. That's right, dopamine and norepinephrine, and you can feel it. And I try to cut it off, and I'll do things. I'll do things that will actually immediately into a long hot sauna, Epsom salt bath, reading can sometimes break that up. Television, this is the only time I think television is good. On the back end of a flow state, television will pull you out of flow really pretty damn fast. It's a non-flow experience, and even though it feels engaging, but it will pull you out of flow and it won't burn out all that neurochemistry. The problem is less about that. Or, the big problem that you see in action sports is the opposite end is people like a couple of years ago, there were all these deaths on the pro surf tour from people from speed, right? And what's happening is surfing is packed with flow triggers, very high flow activity. And especially at the elite level, it's really hard to win without a lot of flow in the equation. And what happens afterwards is the athletes don't want to come down, right? They're super high and they don't want to come down. So not only do they chase the state, right? You'll get a lot of social activity afterwards because there's all that dopamine, and that dopamine will let's keep talking about it, and that'll feed it, right? It'll and you'll burn out more dopamine, or you'll get people partying, trying to chase the state with drugs and alcohol to stay at that level. And if both are disasters, simply because we have limited amounts of dopamine in the brain. And if you use all of it on all of the norepinephrine, it's going to take a while to replenish, to reboot, to get back to that level. And some of the neurochemicals, serotonin, for example, as we know, you need sunlight, you need certain vitamins and minerals. And so your diet is going to matter. And there's refractory recovery periods on the back end of flows, a cycle. And on the back end of a flow state, there's a built-in recovery period. Right. And it's useful for certain things. It's not useful for a lot of other things. But the point is that you have to recover on the back end of flow states. This is another thing that athletes, but you asked about burnout with athletes, right? If you're not recovering on the back end of a flow state, you're going to, over time, lock yourself out of flow. And you're going to deny yourself the very thing. So, active recovery protocols really matter on the back end of flow because it also keeps you from chasing the high of the state if you actually want more flow for athletic performance. And the thing that is worth remembering, because it's really hard in that situation to turn that off, right? It's really hard to say, oh, wow, I should shut these feelings down. I should shift my state. I should use a mindfulness respiration practice that calms me down so I can drop out of flow. You don't hear people say that very often, but I always try to remind athletes and everybody else, it's more fun performing at your very best on the court in flow or skiing. That's more fun than the party. Always is, right? If you're a serious athlete, you're going to take the peak performance experience over the party, right? Because that's why you got into this in the first place. And so if you could chase, I'm not saying partying is bad. Don't get me wrong. I am one of the first guys who says every now and then, everybody should take a vacation from reality. I'm not anti-drug. I'm not anti-drinking. I think the vacations from reality are probably a healthy built-in need, and every species on Earth has the need to alter their consciousness. This we know. This is well-established biology. So we like to change state to, shut things off sometimes, and it's helpful. But the high of performing at your best is more fun as a general rule than the high of the party. And that is what you have to keep reminding yourself, because the temptation, right? You have to, and the brain will chase the temptation unless you set a different goal and say, hey, there's more pleasure to be had over here if you just don't go in that direction for a little while. And that tends to be a fairly useful reframe.
I really like how this stuff is transferable. It's life, writing, your daily life, and then sport. And you were talking in your book, which I'll ask you about here in a second, on how I'll always remember this. How I think it was Hemingway who would just leave the sentence hanging. He would find the peak spot of his work, or maybe it was a different author. He would find the peak spot of his work and then just
leave. It's the idea is to maximize flow in writing. One of these is quit while you're most excited. Hemingway talked about it. I learned it from Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Is where I heard about it. A lot of different people have used it for a long time.
Yeah, and so I know track coach Tony Heller talked about leaving athletes wanting more and cutting out sprints, and that just totally fits in. So I know time is limited here, so I know, and we've talked about your book, The Art of Impossible. Would you mind just sharing about that briefly, and before we get out?
Yeah, the Art of Impossible is, it's 30 years spent time studying peak performance, and It's the first how-to I've ever written about flow. It's a peak performance primer. It's the full suite. It's motivation skills, learning skills, creativity skills, and flow skills is sort of the suite. But it's a book that I wrote for anybody interested in kind of really leveling up their game and going after higher, harder challenges. And the point of the book is that we humans are literally biologically designed to go after these challenges. We're designed to go big. And it turns out not going big is bad for us, which is interesting. But that's a whole different conversation. But that's what the book is. It's a how-to peak performance primer. I've written a lot of books about peak performance over the years, but I've never put it together. It took 30 years to figure out, how does all this stuff work together? What's the order? What's the sequence? How does the biology work? How do we get farther faster? But so that's what The Art of Impossible is.
Yeah, it was an awesome book. So everyone listening, make sure you guys check it out. I've had an opportunity
Yeah,
to read it myself.
Find it anywhere, Amazon and whatnot.
So, all right. Well, thank you so much for your time, Steven. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you. Bye-bye.
That wraps up another show. We'll see you guys next week. Have a good one.